at risk for compliance violation and gaps in your current insurance coverage. And the whole purpose about today is to make sure that you understand what it takes to have your practice protected and yourself protected, not at risk for compliance violations. So we brought on the best of the best in terms of experts. We have Daniel Hirsch, who is a certified healthcare auditor and also a compliance officer. And then we have William Sullivan, who is the executive VP of CM&F Group. Of course, as always, we have Brian Gallagher, who is the founder of Meg Business Management, and myself, I am Nicole. I'm the Chief Development Officer of Meg Academy. So a couple of housekeeping items. We do have some links that we're going to put up here. There is a free PT compliance checklist that was designed by Daniel. And if you click this link, you'll be able to download that form. And of course, we have our resource page, which is please visit frequently and often. We have a ton of information that we update on a regular basis, including links that are relevant and current. We have a compliance page that's dedicated to our ethics and compliance program. You can learn more about that. If you have specific questions about the ethics and compliance program, there will also be a link up there for that in particular. And then finally, we have we're offering a free 10-minute consultation with Daniel, and that link can be found there as well. And if you have any other questions, you can always hit the contact us button on our website as well. And we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So with that said, I would like to spend a little time with each panelist. So if we can start with you, Daniel, give us a little background about your experience and tell us a little bit about yourself, to give the audience a little bit of background info.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for the brief introduction. I just wanted to share with everyone, Nicole and I had a really brief conversation the other day, and I thought it was healthy to hear the following from her, right? Why should we listen to Daniel? And who are you and what do you do? And it was so humbling to hear and just perfect. So first, I'm a physical therapist. I'm licensed in 4 states. I have worked in the acute, subacute, and outpatient settings. Prior to becoming a PT, I worked in the property and casualty insurance world, and I loved it. It was great. From insuring businesses really and focusing on different liability coverage and work comp, at the same time, I had my life and health insurance license, which actually only helped me to understand how complicated health insurance contracts really are. So I really enjoyed assessing business risk and helping others, from owners protect what they proudly built. Yeah. I was fortunate enough to have been given an amazing opportunity to combine my 2 careers and really apply my skills as a compliance officer and also an auditor. So I brought PT language into the auditing perspective and crafted role-based outpatient therapy benchmarks for compliance. So not very often do you hear those 2 come together. To date, I've audited at least 850 clinics and just over 7,000 therapy charts. Wow. I have extensively lectured on ethics in the profession of PT. I love doing this. I love helping therapists understand really how to efficiently and reasonably maintain compliance. And, I've spoken with Brian. Anyone who speaks with me knows that I enjoy writing policies for some reason. But policies are just really the foundation to any program. So it's just really a starting line. And so when you look at it, it's identifying gaps within your compliance program, specifically how to be comprehensive and how you really maintain and view your operations. So it's a fine line. We're going to bring some different approaches, I think, today to being offensive, but also being defensive at the same time, which is, I think our strength. We really hold the line there.
Yeah, and I like what you said earlier, Daniel. You're like, just because you have a binder up on your bookshelf does not make you compliant. You have to be able to, put those to use. So I think we're going to hear a little bit more insight on that from you today. So I appreciate you being here. Will, can you please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background?
Sure. Well, first off, I just want to say thank you, Nicole and Brian and team for having CMF join, myself personally. So my background is my family. We own a family company, CMF Group, which is a insurance company. So we focused on medical malpractice. We've been around for 102 years now. We cover over 100,000 clients nationally, 200 different specialties in healthcare. And then for physical therapy specifically, that's been one of our growing areas for over a decade or so. But we cover a ton of students, individuals, whether employed or self-employed, and then also PT clinics nationally. So we deal with thousands of PTs in each iteration. So what I do is I actually run our service team, customer service, our underwriting, as depending upon the type of risk profile, what we can cover, what we can't. And I kind of run that part of our operation. And we're based out of New York City, but we have people nationally. We also cover PTs nationally. Taking a step back about myself personally, similar to Daniel, when I graduated from college, I got into property and casualty as well, but I focused zeroed in on medical malpractice. So that's what I did for a whole host of things, from physical therapy, midwives, to acupuncturists, chiros, all across the board, and took a step back. And I guess we're like, kind of two different lanes of the compliant or the gap function of business, so to speak. So I went into law school and actually focused on healthcare law. So I have a specialization in healthcare law, and then I'm barred in the state of Florida, although I'm up in Indiana now. So I have a fair amount of background working in the consulting nature on the health insurance aspect of the Affordable Care Act and consulting the federal government on that before transitioning back to my family company that I help run with my brothers, my father, and a whole host of others. So that's kind of the whole kit and caboodle, and just looking forward to giving some insights and helping out.
Good. I just want to give the Cliff Notes version that these guys are pretty smart. So pay attention. They have a lot of info for you. So the way that we're going to kind of run this is we've put together a bunch of questions that have come from our clients, that have, Danielle's clients. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through these questions, but please, 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 we love the engagement from you as well. So if you have specific questions that you want answered, feel free to fire those in, and we will ask those questions as well and get our experts to answer them. But I'm just going to kind of go down the line here, and I'm going to have Daniel, I'm going to have you start. And the first question is, what code am I allowed to bill for certain procedures in the clinic, and how can I stay compliant when working through a full caseload?
So it's a great question. It's one of the most common questions because every therapist that comes out of school, you're on your own. You have to figure it out. You have to figure out, where your resources are. It can't be Google. Your resource cannot be Google. For billing, coding, and documentation standards, right? EMR systems they're very helpful in many cases, but you still need a tool. You still need a reference. And also you need to know what the actual definitions of the codes for which you bill. So it sounds basic, right, Nicole? But we need to know, are they direct? Are they indirect? Are they in person? Are they specific? Are they timed? Are they untimed, right? Or are they even having constant attendance requirements? So you need to select therapy-specific ICD-10 codes for your patient. And then also, regardless of whatever EMR system you use, templates are also very helpful for guiding evaluations, really to record patient information. I love the hard stops that people put in. Those are great to use. That usually those just restrict you from signing a note if some critical component of the note is missing, like a prior level of function or an outcome test, or even like an updated assessment, right? It stops you hard from doing that. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that when you have some reference, it gives you a competitive advantage because you know what you're missing and you know where the reference is to really guide you in those decisions. So it's not simply a cookie cutter cookbook to say, hey, for this low back patient, this is what you should be doing. No, there are some guides, there are some standards for that, but you need to know what those rules and how to apply them, and you need a reference for that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our clients will always come to us about the schedule. And Brian, maybe you can weigh in on this. I think a lot of like what the training we have in Meg Academy is to to teach you to, have good time management. And especially with the new grads who come out and are so nervous about overbilling, half the time they're under, and I'm saying billing, but under billing in terms of, what they're
coding.
actually doing, under coding. Yes. In terms of what they're doing. But can you weigh in a little bit on that and, enlighten?
Yeah. So I've
listeners?
been sitting patiently waiting for my turn. So this is my, 30 seconds she's going to allot me.
Everybody knows you, Brian.
So I just want to kind of like photo bomb in onto this Zoomcast right now and just say, I'm going to mix up this whole format a bit. So Nicole laid it out very nice. And, like your teacher in 5th grade, it sounded really great. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be you for you listeners. And I'm going to try to think like yourself, because this is what I get every day. This is what I run into every week. This is what Nicole and I entertain. We are here to serve you. So I'm going to be your representative here. And of course, I want you to write in the chat and ask all your questions. So I think very simplistically, these two guys have IQs well over like 2000. And so we're just trying to compete here, Nicole and I, at the mid 150s, just trying to do the best we can. So here's the way I see it. When you look at Daniel Hirsch and you look at his compliance program and what he's put together and what he's dedicated his life to, it's prevention. Okay. It's prevention. It's like, don't get the ticket. It's like, don't get pulled over. Here's what you can do so you don't get pulled over. And the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of whatever the saying goes. And again, I'm not smart enough to know these things. I just know the beginning half, right? I can't finish. But an ounce of prevention goes a mile, right? So I think every single time I engage Daniel and work with him and talk to him about things, even the question that Nicole posed to him was a really good question, but he's formulated an app. I mean, the guy is a genius. He built an app, PT Coder, right, Daniel? I want to say it right.
It's PT Pocket Coder, yes.
PT Pocket Coder.
And like you said, it's just a tool. It's just a way for people to have a reference.
Yep. And I was saying earlier to him before we got on the Zoomcast, I've been studying the PT Pocket Coder this morning for about 30 minutes, went through all the stuff, and I said, man, this is great. If you're a new grad, this is exactly what you need. Like, it is a pocket coder. Like, it literally should be in your pocket, but because it's an app, it's wherever you go. And then when I look at Will and everything his family's done and his company and whatnot, and I've been through so many insurance companies, and there's certain people that are in bed with the APTA, people are not in bed. Nicole's like, don't go there. I'm like, look, I love the APTA. Don't get me wrong. We're like the largest advocate, but you all know over time, certain things get, they get eased. And I've always shopping for no. We should not form relationships with companies or people just because of some historical blah, blah, blah. It's based on performance. It's based on genuineness. It's based on follow through, commitment, true passion. I got a Post-it note on my screen here that says strive to serve. The minute I'm not willing to serve my public is the minute you shouldn't start listening to me. So here's my first question. As I said, I was going to shake this up a little bit. Being a PT owner, Nicole's got really great questions. We're going to answer each and every one of those. But Daniel, if I'm a startup clinic there's 3 phases of private practice. Okay. There's startup, there's the growth phase. Somebody's been open 3 to 8 years, somewhere in there. And then there's the mature phase of business, the veteran practice, right? In your experience, Daniel, I just want to, because we have got listeners in all 3 spectrums. In your experience, who's most negligent in getting on top of their compliance issues? Who doesn't take it as serious? Who doesn't jump out of the gate and do the work, the heavy lifting that they need to do that it allows them to be at the greatest level of risk exposure, in your opinion, Daniel? And then Will, you've had lots of people who've come to you and be like, yeah, we got this coming up our pipeline. Who is this? Is this the 100 office practice that's been open 10 years? Or is this usually the mom and pop that's got 1 clinic, they've been open 24 months? I'd like to hear that from you 2 guys, because I have my own thoughts on that. But what do you say, Daniel? You first.
Well, I've researched this. I'll tell you what the research says. It says that those who have a lot more experience, they make errors, they make mistakes, but they're very different than those who are coming out fresh. And the reason is you can't rely, right? So the new grad can't rely on that wealth of information. They've had, 20,000 experiences of treating the knee. Okay, fantastic. That's great. But when it comes to compliance, you don't necessarily know what you don't know. So you're not benchmarking. You're not saying, well, first of all, what am I missing? How are you detecting those deficits? And really, what can you do about that? That new grad may be thinking that, but someone who's experienced, they have a lot of, good or bad, they bring a lot to the table. So that's always going to bring bias. So the idea is that if you're not aware of that, if you're not thinking and recognizing that you're just going to miss really common things that someone like myself or someone, any expert that comes in and says, listen, these are the standards, you need to be held accountable for that because you're exposing yourself. That's the differential.
And I think too, it's because it's a constantly moving target. I mean, compliance today doesn't look like it did compliance 10 years ago. So if you graduated 10 years ago and you're kind of, not staying on top of, the current updates, you're going to be at risk.
So
right?
If I just summarize what Daniel said and Nicole said, it's the veteran therapist, the one that's been out the longest. Like Nicole says, things change, things happen. And a lot of them, I've been out 28 years. You look back and I've been fine. I've been doing great. I've never had a problem before. I've never had to do this before. I
didn't know you were that old.
Yeah. Well, at least I'm catching up to you gradually. You're like 10 years younger than me. But yeah, I am that old. I've been around a long time and I've seen a lot of things. And I can tell you complacency is probably the biggest thing. And, like Daniel said, I'll tell you what the research says, and it says that. Will, do you kind of see the same thing?
Yeah, I would say most of the time, one of the fallbacks from a healthcare perspective that people that get out of school usually have the most up-to-date knowledge, right?
Right.
So the likelihood of them getting a claim or an incident is lower, but that's also by virtue of how much training you're having with somebody looking over your shoulder for a period of time too. So usually you start seeing claims kind of hit or professional ethics issues hitting, usually after a 5-year mark or more.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the size of a PT clinic, well, we've been in, a relatively low litigious environment for healthcare providers now for the better part of about 15, 20 years from an insurance perspective. And we're starting to see that turn within the past 3 years. So I think we're going to see an uptick from smaller practices to larger. Clearly, if you're larger and you've been around longer, the likelihood of you having a lawsuit or an incident is going to be much bigger there. But yeah, that kind of gives you an indication of the idea of, what's going on the longer you're in practice, and especially from a compliance function. It's, if you learn it right off the bat and you maintain it and go through, when the claim comes in 5 years later and you're still with the same insurance company, you can provide the patient documentation and it's all there and set.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to talk about it with an expert witness and discuss the defense versus saying, Johnny doesn't work here anymore and he left and we can't find the documentation. Might be something you have to settle on. So there's a lot of interplay with all of this.
So Will, you're saying basically like if you're a startup clinic or if you're a single provider and you're only seeing 100, let's say you're a startup clinic and you're only seeing like 50 to 80 visits a week, your risk exposure is far different than if your clinic's seeing 800 visits a week, right? So it's just basic math, right? It's just basic risk exposure, in true insurance form. And Daniel, you're saying it's also a component not only of risk exposure, but it's a component of mental attitude. It's a component of the mental attitude, right? A little bit of that complacency, a little bit of that, hey, everything's been fine. We've never had a problem. Why should we worry about it? Nicole, I think what I want to say, and I want to give it back to you. Let's hit the questions, right? Let's hit the questions. But what I want to say to the public here is this. We do a tremendous number of startup clinics per year. I mean, we get startups on our lines every single week. We do a tremendous number of clinics, have 5, 6, 7, 8 offices. People have been around 28 years and call us up and work. So as we're trying to establish, as I'm imploring, I'm trying to be like, as we're trying to do as best we can to create the best company structure, the best systems of operation, the best personnel management training, the best marketing, social, digital media training, all of that is fine and good. But that house of cards comes tumbling down if you don't have the preventive steps in place. Yeah. Whether you're a startup and you're 1 month open or whether you've been open 10 years, if you don't have the protective insurance in place, because Daniel said 1,000 times, I think will concur. Anyone will sue you for anything. Anyone will sue anyone for anything. It does not matter what the law says. There is always somebody out there who's going to bring a case against you, or someone's going to talk a patient into something somewhere, somehow. So I'm really eager to hear what Will says. Like, I can insulate you against that kind of craziness. And Daniel's like, I can get you set up to prevent it. But let's hear some of the questions that are real life that you guys have been writing in. Owners of ours have a tremendous benefit because when they're a Meg executive client, they have a private Facebook page. And these are the places where they throw these questions and we answer that for them. Cost them nothing. We have these resources we provide it. But now we're going to take some of those and we're going to share them with you, the raw public. So go ahead, Nicole, let's get into that. But I just wanted to really make that point that you can't, I had somebody say, well, Brian, I'm going to do your startup accelerator program. And then a couple of years down the road, I'll look at the compliance program. I'm like, okay, so that's like, Brian, I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to use the gas pedal, but in another year or so, I'll buy the brake pedal. I'm like, what? That makes no sense. We totally pair these together and give you discounts to do them together because they're in your best interest, not ours.
Yeah, that's part of our job to help keep you safe.
Keep you safe.
On the straight and narrow.
Put your seatbelt on.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I think this kind of flows in nicely. Why do I, to formally need to complete an internal audit if I have a small practice? I think that kind of goes just in line with what we've been talking about. Daniel.
Sure, and real quick, Brian, I just want to say about the statistics that you said with regard to if you see more, there's more risk. It's also, I'm famous for saying, right, you're only as good, you're only as strong as that weakest employee. If they're exposing you,
it's true.
Good luck, right? So the volume may impact that, but at the end of the line, you have to hold it. So that's why I keep bringing that up, that it does matter how you're training your employees. And with respect to the auditing, it's really a lot like every other part of your life. We don't just want to know if we're going in the right direction, like the car analogy, but we also need to know if we're performing accurately in what we're doing. So it's really a stress test. That's what I'm trying to say. So
stress test, that's great. Everybody can think with that, right? Like you always have to have a stress test. I mean, Nicole does that with the whole ranch. All the heifers, all the cows are stress test regularly.
I need one weekly because of this guy.
Yeah. I mean, you're only as good as the weakest, cow you got on the farm.
Out.
I get it. I totally get it. So Daniel, continue that stress test. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Thank you. So like the internal audit, it's really, the formal process in which really one moves to the best of your ability, putting aside any bias, and you review the current controls that are in place. And you really want to ensure that
you're doing this. They don't have any lifting to do. They just contract you and you swoop in and you take care of it.
Well, that's the whole concept of an audit. So you can do it yourself, but you're going to bring something to the table that could prevent you from accurately doing it. There's a lot of challenges. You don't want to do that. You really want a fresh pair of eyes. That's the whole idea.
I wanted to make that point because it's like, what is it, like $600, Nicole?
Yeah. So that's actually, it's funny that you're bringing that up because we've recognized that this is an integral component to have an effective implementation of a compliance program. So what we have decided, and this is very new to all of you listening, is that we have included an audit as part of the comprehensive compliance program. But if you are not sure and you say, hey, listen, I have my own compliance program in place and I think it's pretty darn good. If you just want to purchase the audit a la carte, you can do that. And that's what we are saying is currently it's the $600 charge.
And then you can sleep at night. You've got it. You may think you got all your bells and whistles and all your I's dotted, T's crossed, but you don't know until you have an external audit. So continue, Daniel, because I think that's just such a valuable thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're just really trying to see if your operational procedures, if they're working properly. And I'll give you a really quick example. So let's say you're collecting copays, right? You think you're doing it in an appropriate manner, okay? But how do you know this? You think you're doing it. You need an audit to review the process and see what that workflow is going at the front desk to see if, are they collecting it? Are they identifying who's supposed to be paying that copay? Right? Each insurance carrier has their own rules. So you need to check, was the correct payment collected? Where was that amount recorded? Did you give a receipt to that patient? Was the record updated in the system to reflect the correct balance? And maybe there was a financial hardship. So all these things go into place where it sounds simple. Did you collect it? But you have to dive deeper. You have to know exactly what the workflow, what should have been taking place, and then you measure against it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And you've identified that there's different components of an audit or different types of an audit. So what does a clinic facility audit look like?
I was going to joke, there's the scary kind. No, I'm kidding. So the facility audit is, in my prior career, walking into a business and really assessing the liability by inspecting structures, updates, equipment, Will, you know this, it all impacts the rating and eventual cost of the premium, right? So our clinics are no different. I think we could all agree that you have industry standards in place. We have risk mitigating procedures, best practices that are all known. They're supposed to be known to your staff, but you don't want to use this type of insurance. And sorry, Will, I'll just pick on you again, but it's not something that you want to use. This is supposed to protect your business. So, you know, the amount of times that I've walked into a clinic and the owner or the clinic director said, oh yeah, we have this or we have that. And then when you actually go to check, you know, maybe they had it 5 years ago, or maybe they had and now it's expired. The whole point is that it has to be checked on a routine basis. And really the reason to perform the audit is not simply to avoid the insurance claims or malpractice, but it's to ensure that you're operating at really the highest capacity. And Brian, you talk about this all the time, because we have a responsibility to provide safe, effective, professional services. We're bound to that. So this is just another component of that.
Okay, good. So how does that differ from like just a specific front desk audit? What does that look like?
That's completely different. That's really looking at workflow at that role specific. So what is there, like the example of collecting copays. So you break down exactly what takes place at the front desk. You know, in the world of telecommuting or whatever, that may be a little bit different on how things are recorded and documented, but you actually go through in a systematic manner and benchmark against what the standards are.
Is that where most of the breaches are? Is that where you find most of, you know, the outpoints are?
You know, the majority of breaches occur actually from emails. So the majority of what we're seeing electronically is just simply people accidentally, not without intent, they're sending out emails to the wrong recipient, either to the wrong whoever, right? They're just not checking. That could be a fax too. There's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of ways to mess it up.
Yeah, we saw that a lot in the beginning of COVID, where it's like, I thought I was blind CCing and it was not blind CC'd, to get the communication out there. So yeah, be aware of that when you're shuffling out emails. Okay, and finally, before we hop over to Will, how can I assess what items are likely to cause potential claims?
So that's a great question. You know, Will definitely knows the percentages. So I'm not going to go into that for the industry, but I'll give you a completely avoidable cause, right, of negligence, which is burning patients. Everyone knows, you know, you're shaking your head. No, we don't burn our patients, but things get busy. There's oversight sometimes that maybe we're not being so careful. Very simple. You could just have a daily log for recording the hydroculator temperature, right? What's considered safe, you should know, right? Read the unit, read what's going on, but typically it's about 140 to 165 for that temperature. So you prove it that you have, yes, I'm doing something to mitigate the risk. Am I properly putting on layers for the hot pack? So once again, are you training? Did you have proof that you trained your staff on how to actually apply this? These are all impacts. So we know patient's positioning, are they lying supine, prone, the intensity of the heat, right? How does that impact the heat? So maybe they have a contraindication. So all these things are very simple ways to mitigate that risk. That claim should always be zero. You should never burn your patient ever. And you could have just simple benchmarks of this is what we do in our clinic and these are our standards.
Very good.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, if you guys are listening now, owners, PTs, and your head's spinning a little bit, it's because you're hearing Daniel just fluidly go from, hey, when we audit you, we have to audit the operating procedures administratively at the front desk. We have to audit the clinical operating procedures of a therapist. Are you demonstrating medical necessity? Are you overutilizing a code? Are you underutilizing a code? Are you inappropriately adding modifiers and things of that nature? Are you lacking medical necessity? You know, things like that. Then we have HIPAA rules and standards. We have so many regulatory body rules and standards that just span the spectrum between clinical, operational. I mean, I was reading one of the things you sent me, Daniel, where a clinic had let go 3 employees, and within 5 or 7 days of their termination, they came back to clean out their desk and get their stuff, and they got into their computer, and one of the employees downloaded a whole bunch of patient information, put it on a thumb drive, like 480 patients, you know, professional, private information, whatever left. And that cost that facility $202,000, because when they fired somebody, they then instantaneously at that minute, or even prior to bringing them in the room and letting them go, they didn't lock them out of the system. I mean, simple oversights like that. How many of you are watching us right now and said, oh yeah, I've let somebody go and it's taken me a couple of days before I locked them out of my system, or before I changed their password, whatever. Maybe it took you a day. I'm telling you, from the minute they walk out, they're terminated, you're at risk. They're not allowed to have access to that stuff. Or somebody at your front desk who an attorney called and said, I need the file for a daily note. And then they send the whole file. Well, they only ask for 1 day of service. You can't just, and you guys are scratching your heads now listening to me go, oh my gosh, that's happened in my office a ton of times. Like we just give them everything because we know they're going to ask for another day. Can't do that. And we'll roll this into Will because Will sees these claims. And unfortunately, his family's got to reach into HIP National Bank and pay it out. And he doesn't want to be paying out these claims. So let's talk about, little protection at this point. But yeah. Daniel's got this hardwired. I mean, my parting thought on this, start with the audit. It's $600. I mean, it's half the value of one patient from start to finish, for heaven's sakes. At least know where you are. At least get an examination of where you are and get a score, know where you're starting from. From there, you decide what you want to do. If you want to move on to the compliance program, have everything handed to you and move it. Literally, Nicole's going to tell you, she's going to credit the $600 back off the compliance program. So you didn't spend anything really. You're going to just get the whole program. You're going to get that discount paid forward. So enough said on that. Let's talk about the protection side of things.
I am interested to hear a little bit, Will. What are your most common claims that you see with the PT private practices you work with?
Yeah, good question. For the claims that we see, for the most part, that I see, whether it's people that we're covering or people that are actually coming to us for a quote, and they have some kind of, quote unquote, sordid history. I mean, you're seeing a lot of care that's pushing down too hard on rotator cuffs, maybe doing it a little bit extra hard, not having a good enough relationship with that physical therapist or practice to go back to them with the concern, but actually ditching and going to somebody else, getting a second opinion. So you kind of have a disconnect of that patient treatment. And then all of a sudden somebody else in the community is saying, hey, they did something wrong here. You have the burns that Daniel talked about. I mean, it's not as common as it used to be across healthcare. It's a big focal point. And especially in cosmetic, of course, different avenues for physical therapy, but that's a big one. We've had claims not for physical therapy, but similar vein for acupuncturists putting heat on people. So cupping, depending upon what physical therapist you are and where you are, leaving the patient treatment room because maybe it's on their lower back and they're female. So you have to give them discretion and privacy. They'll leave them in there. And then all of a sudden, you might have the cups falling off the table, or they're burning and nobody's actively looking at them. And then the last one I think is really simple outside of what Daniel talked about is just moving from A to B. Especially, we work with some folks that really focus on balance. And you're dealing with geriatric populations. You can't have people going on and off of bikes, walking to and fro different sets, and they're 85 and maybe they have a bum knee. That's why they're with you. And then you're having them walk independently and they slip and fall. And that can turn into either negligence on the care or just a slip and fall from a general liability standpoint.
Oh my gosh, Will, I am so glad you brought that up. Nicole, how many times do we have owners say, well, I'm never going to hire techs. I don't want techs in my clinic. Like they're like from the Wizard of Oz or something. Like you don't want that. Like you got something against techs. Yeah. You need techs to be personally standing with the patient, guiding them. When my patient's on a bike, I want my tech standing right next to them. What if they get lightheaded, they faint, or they, whatever. I mean, Johnny Unitas died riding an exercise bike in a physical therapy clinic in Baltimore. I mean, that's a true story. These things happen. You can't just be a PT sitting over there in your little, rollaway table documenting and watching the pedals go around. You literally have to think about what is the worst thing that could happen, and do I have a preventative step in place?
And that's
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, and that's a big question, Brian. I know you brought it up on another conversation with us, but when you're diversifying your revenue streams, so if you start going into these gyms or fitness facilities attached to a physical therapy clinic, all of a sudden you have people that might get a membership, and then they're kind of cruising in from a private pay standpoint. That's wonderful business. But you need to differentiate how you're treating somebody who's coming in independently and fine and not a patient, a client, and a member versus a patient who needs to be walked through, and making sure you're not intermingling with you so that those techs, so to speak, actually know who they're tracking with.
Right.
And it's it really is a concern. You see enough claims, somebody can fall, you hit your head, you pass away, you break a hip, And if you break a hip when you're in your older age, I mean, that's pretty devastating for people and can likely turn into them passing away. So those are kind of the claims that we see outside of the sexual misconduct, and not as much as you would think it would be with the hands-on profession. But, you know, you certainly need, if you're doing any type of, you know, de-dressing, you want to make sure there's some kind of level of chaperone there as well. It's not just an individual, one person of one sex with another person of another sex, especially if there's age bracket differences with a minor versus an adult, all types of stuff you see. That's not necessary for the care.
Let me ask you about that, Will. And I know Nicole's got other questions. I don't want to divert here, but recently I've been called to help out clients, and, you know, one client really, and then another one that wasn't a client, sexual misconduct. Okay. Inappropriate, but it's not, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not just clinician patient. It's not just tech patient. It's not just employee public. It's also between employee, right? It could also be issues going on there. I've had owners send me text messages of texts saying, hey, I'm interested in getting it on with you back in the break room when the last patient's over. I mean, you guys would not believe it, but that's the kind of text I'm reading, right? That people are literally doing that. Or I had somebody who was a front desk office manager, had a blowout with a front desk coordinator, stormed into the owner's office, said, I can't take it anymore. I hate this girl. If you're not going to fire her, then I'm leaving. He's like, I'm not firing her. She walked out, left. A year later, files a claim for medical discrimination. Why? Because she was sick a month earlier. None of that had any merit at all. Do you know he had to pay out that claim? He literally had to pay out that claim because the insurance company came in and said, it's better just to settle this thing, make it go away, than the legal fees of literally $100,000 to fight these things. And the medical coverage was just enough, like just enough. It was not even, it was just barely enough to cover it. And people are, you know, people tell me all the time, well, I got liability insurance. I said, well, what's your coverage? Oh, like $10,000. I'm like, you better rethink that. You better rethink that. This girl who left, stormed out, quit, and still filed for what's it called? Inappropriate termination, or whatever it's called, unfounded termination, whatever it was, grounds for. She filed for $90,000. She filed for $90,000. That's ridiculous. I mean, am I crazy, Will? I mean, you must, you know.
Sure. So, I mean, there's three ways that you can kind of look at that. I mean, number one, from the medical malpractice standpoint, you're looking at sexual misconduct defense. That's going to defend you. It's not going to pay out if there's actually sexual misconduct, of course, right? Because then that's against the law. So barring that, between the patient and the provider or the clinic, that's the coverage malpractice will cover. Now, when you start talking about people who are outside of the patient standpoint, either internally or external, like the UPS man that comes in, Bob comes in every day, and
what about that?
You start dealing with sexual misconduct. Anybody that's transgressing or going on and off of your property, you're starting to look at something called employer EPLI. So that's more of a different vein of it.
What's that stand for?
What's that?
What's that stand for? EPLI.
Yeah. So it's liability related to the employer.
I mean,
that's what it is.
And not everybody has that coverage, right?
No, not everybody has it. One of the interesting things and this gets me to my point of the practicality of it outside the insurance prevention standpoint, is that if you work with an HR organization such as ADP, Insperity, whatever, not giving a plug, but those are the types that you can do, they'll actually automatically include that as part of your coverage, because then they'll have an HR expert who you can call and say, this happened to Susie, she left, she was an employee, what do I do? Okay, well, you have coverage on that with us, and let's put an expert on the line with you on your specific state law and how you notify people. So that's one of the pieces that you can do to really just buffer you from internal with your team, as well as your patients or people coming in and off of your.
Do you recommend that these days?
Absolutely. We don't offer the coverage ourselves. I mean, that's one of the things, talking to Nicole, our focal point is malpractice and then cyber liability. I can tell you business owners policies, absolute must, workers' comp required, EPLI, absolute must, just like auto would be. So these are just normal pieces of insurance that everybody should have, no matter
what. Could I ask you for a favor, Will, for our listeners? Could you put together a one-page document of the list of these coverages? Because I can tell you, I've been at this a long time. I still get confused on what covers what. I mean, I really do. I'm not as smart as Nicole. So I really do get stumbled on some of this stuff. I would love it if we could use it as a form fill, maybe, Nicole. So for those of you who are listening and everyone who wants to really get a little clarity on what Will's really talking about, he's going to list I don't know, 5 or 6 insurance plans or policies you should have. And he's going to write next to it, absolute must, and then he'll write okay, recommended, stuff like that. So you'll know, I absolutely must have these. These are recommended when I can afford them, and give a little sense of what they cost and what they do. What do they mean? Because I can tell you, these owners have no idea what it means. They have no idea what these cost. I believe none of these are very expensive. I don't believe they are. I could be mistaken. It depends on where you are in the country, I'm sure. But I don't believe, when you look at the average GI, gross revenue, of a physical therapy practice, that not having this coverage is a smart idea. I don't think that's a smart idea. I think it's worth the dollars.
Yeah, well, and we're gonna need that by 3:30, just so you know.
3:30 today.
Sure, they're gonna be flowing in.
Yeah. Well, he's in the office. I see the fluorescent light behind him. He's just gonna
I got the fluorescent, so I'm ready to go. One thing I did want to highlight for everybody, which I think talks about the whole underlying issue here, is that we are going through COVID. People are hurting financially, which when you get into the billing issues, I can tell you, outside the insurance perspective for me, but with my healthcare law background, you're going to look at the Office of Inspector General, OIG, which enforces HIPAA, as well as billing and coding issues. They're going to look to get money somehow. And the way state governments or federal government can recoup money is by recouping it based on improper billing use. So, and if you're doing more and more in-home, home health is the biggest one for potential fraud. So, and I know a lot of folks are starting to go in home. So just based on my background, I think that's a good thing to know. And I'm sure Daniel can give you a better highlight on all of that information.
Now, between the two of you guys, you two have to answer this for the public, because we get a lot of startups that want to do mobile PT practices. Now, when you say home health services, I think Med A, home health, JACO certified, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So let's not touch on that. Okay. Those are very regulated. Those are very big monsters within every state. But I think what Will's talking about is, for those of you who are starting this mobile PT practice, I was on the PT Coder, Pocket Coder, I told you I was on his app, and there's a place of service code 12 and there's a place of service code 15. Daniel, maybe you can chime in, and I do want to hear back from you, Will, on this, because I think we're talking about mobile PT practices, which is a hot topic, and Nicole has just created a whole rollout program on how to successfully establish, build, grow, and flourish and prosper in the mobile PT environment. Okay, so you guys can call in and talk to Nicole, reach into us and talk to her about that. But Daniel, I believe the place of service code for the mobile PT practice is code 15. It's not code 12. Am I correct?
Well, it's a good question, but there should be a definition next to it.
I'm sounding like I'm not correct, Nicole.
Where's your air background, Brian?
I know that here. All right, go ahead, Daniel. Throw it at me, because I'm already feeling it.
No, you're fine. It's a great idea. I love the mobile. Rent's too high. You got to keep going. I understand it, but when you are mobile, that means you are exposing as well. Not just from an insurance perspective, but also from, are you crossing state lines, where your patient is located? So these are all things that you have to be cognizant of. You need to be aware of that. So yes, it's a great idea, but it's just something that you gotta understand what your vulnerabilities are.
Yeah, but
what are the, because I mean, a lot of people, if they have medically fragile people, are saying, oh, I want to do a home visit. So typically they're outpatient ortho, but I want to go and see this person at home because they're not comfortable coming into the clinic and I have the availability to do so. How is that okay for them to do so? And how do they go about doing it?
Typically that's Med B, right? Like Brian was saying, that's not Med A. That falls under, you're not a home agency, you're not which is very heavily regulated. Even from an insurance perspective, you don't want to go there. So yes, it's typically you're putting on the same hat. You're putting on that Med B hat, and you have the same exact rules applying to you. And so just for the definition, the home is location 12. Yes.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a mobile PT practice, I got a box and weights and TheraBand in my car, and I run around and I'm billing Med B, outpatient therapy, and I'm doing 6 people a day in their homes, and I have a nice little mobile practice. That place of service is 12?
15.
Oh, that's what I thought. I was right. I threw the error screen up for nothing, Nicole. You're totally all right. I'm getting to where
It was
Nicole,
worth it. It was
I'm
worth
going
it.
to where Nicole lives because she's out there. Okay.
I'm gonna do the sound effects.
Yeah, I'm in your backyard now. All right. So
Okay.
it is place of service 15
Oh,
when
boy.
you do mobile PT. It is place of service 15. Home health is 12, right?
Okay.
I'm putting him on the spot.
Yep, correct.
Yes.
Okay.
He's
See,
right.
yeah,
He's
again,
good.
IQ of 2000. You can answer that stuff. You don't need to, you don't
Okay.
need to pause.
Perfect. So I have a couple of questions from specifically from Meg clients that I would like to have.
Well, wait a minute. Give Will an answer on that. So Will, that's what you were talking about, right? You're talking about these mobile PT people going out into the homes and it's increasing their exposure, increasing the risk exposure. Is that what you were highlighting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're definitely you're creating a whole new nuanced approach of billing
Right.
and coding, making sure you're doing things accurately.
Right.
And that's, that's the whole issue with home health agencies is that nobody's actually watching these folks.
Right.
I mean, now you can do geolocation and stuff like that. You do it instantaneously with your EMR and you're good to go, presumably. But that's a big, if you just Google OIG, Office of Inspector General, home health fraud, you're going to see a wide variety of that.
And you think that blanket is being thrown over these mobile PT providers who are getting out there doing Med B in the home?
I think anybody, which is
everybody
now,
okay,
is going to start to be, I think a lot of people are going to be audited much more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because those states and federal government make money when they find money that shouldn't have been charged.
Yeah, and they're looking to recoup the trillions of dollars that they've just gone over budget. So back to you, Nicole. I know you got some riveting questions people want to hear.
Yes. All right, good. Okay, so here's the question. Currently, I have my own professional insurance as an independent contractor. When my business is up and running, it will just be me and I plan to pay myself a salary. Therefore, is it necessary to insure the business as well as through the professional insurance? And her service is going to be a home PT, telehealth / group therapy.
We get this one a lot.
Yeah, so for us, we can do it. You can skin the cat a couple of ways. What we do online with the normal process under our policy form is this: you start coverage as Daniel Hirsch, PT, and then you have an additional insured, which is vicarious liability of your entity, Daniel Hirsch LLC. When you expand into having more than one person, then you'll actually shift over and you'll make the primary name Daniel Hirsch LLC. So there's a couple different ways. What you can't do if you're a sole proprietor, you've got to make sure your entity is listed on the coverage with you. It's a slightly nuanced area of insurance.
As an additional insured, Will?
Yes, as an additional.
So I, Brian Gallagher, open up Wisconsin Physical Therapy, and it's just me. And all I have to do is have my own professional liability insurance and add Wisconsin Physical Therapy LLC as an additional insured.
Yes.
Now I go and I hire a few little rabbits and other people in Wisconsin to come work for me. And they're now treating therapists as well. Now I got to get rid of my personal PT liability and get the company one. What do I do next?
Yeah, so you can do two things. Number one, you want to transition to have the entity covered. So that means everybody underneath the umbrella, you and Daniel, Nicole, myself, we're all the rabbits. We're all covered underneath the entity. Okay. Yep. But if you, Brian, are going to now do, you know what? I love helping out the JV football team every fall. So I'm going to just do that on the side and make a little extra money. Yeah. You want to maintain that individual policy as well as your entity policy.
Gotcha. So that brings me to my next question. That's really, really good. So here's another good question for you. So I have Wisconsin Physical Therapy and I hire Nicole, mistake, right? So I hire Nicole, she's my treating therapist, and she tells the patient to roll over and turns around and starts documenting, and the patient falls off the table and breaks a hip. Patient files suit. Well, I have professional liability insurance for the practice. So I'm protected. Now, I was told this, so you got to correct me. I do not know if this is right or not. So I've got this practice, the suit comes across, I defend the practice against the suit. There's a settlement payout. The practice's insurance pays the patient. The practice then in turn sues Nicole to get recompensated for the error that she made because she's been found liable. She doesn't have her own individual professional liability insurance. Does that happen? Is that a process that now she's at risk? Is that, because I was always told you should have your own individual professional liability insurance, no matter which LLC private practice you work in, because if something like that were to go down, the practice is covered, but that's not going to stop the practice from suing you if you're wrapped up in it. Is that completely wrong, or is that right?
Yeah. So there's a couple different veins of that. So the first part is that Nicole's part and parcel of the entity. So it's all our coverage. Most folks don't cover the employees, independent contractors. So her actions, while an agent of, under corporate law, and the agent of the entity, is good to go. She's covered. Now, if she does something grossly negligent or something completely outside of standard operating procedures, or if there becomes a professionalism issue, professional ethics issue with licensing board, for sure, there's a possibility you guys could have a lawsuit together, or she could even be on her own individually. So for us, we've always considered it this way because we cover people individually. That's historically how we did it. And we also cover people on the entity side, the group side. We always suggest if you're an individual provider, you have your own coverage. Because listen, if Nicole's doing stuff with, the Wisconsin group every day, but maybe every Saturday she goes and does something else, she's liable over there, but she could be liable for a professional ethics issue internally at the entity too. So, I mean, it's always better to have something that's in your own name. Right. Now, most entities or employers are not big fans of that because it might create a contentious issue between Nicole and Wisconsin Group. However, if you have them all covered under the same malpractice company, it'll just work together to make sure everybody's taken care of properly.
Great. Okay. So that's a really good, solid answer. So Nicole, that's something that comes up a lot. So
I think it actually answered the next questions, which make sure I'm reading this right. But if I hire a therapist that already has professional liability insurance coverage, do I need to purchase additional coverage under the umbrella of my practice?
So if you have practice coverage with us, we cover all W-2s and 1099.
It's all.
Yeah. As soon as they're hired, they get covered.
So it's great that they have their own individually for reasons, like you said, if they want to go do other things, but they don't necessarily need it. They would be covered under the umbrella of the entity.
Yes, but we've always said, and I've always said, if you're working in outpatient private practice, and Daniel, tell me if you feel differently. If you're working in outpatient private practice and you have an individual license and you're treating, you should carry your own professional liability insurance, no matter where you go. And obviously, like Will just said, if you're going to go work at Wisconsin Physical Therapy and they're working with his group, get your insurance with his group, because now you're covered by the same group while you're working there.
Yeah.
I think we should keep with that advice. I think that's strong advice.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, we have one last question before we kind of do some closing thoughts, and that's like, perfect timing because we'll wrap up at about an hour here. But what is an example of an insurance policy a PT practice should have, but typically does not? Like something they oversee. I think you mentioned like high tech,
cyber tech
extra,
or something.
Yeah, extra.
Well, right now, I mean, definitely cyber's a major issue. You're definitely seeing a lot of increased issues on ransomware. Daniel highlighted it. Phishing issues. That's all email related. It's usually a manual problem. Even if you're discarding your laptop, you have to make sure you discard them properly so people can't get access to it. Mm-hmm. So, cyber is definitely a major one. But one thing I do want to highlight for you guys real quick, which kind of highlights the gaps. I talked to a guy who bought a practice and he was like, we're good to go. He presumed all the coverages were good to go. I talked to him. He said, yeah, I'm good to go. I have general liability. And I said, all right, well, general liability is this thing. And he had an incident. He said, well, you guys would cover me, right? I'm like, well, number one, you're not a client currently. Number two, you only have general liability. He had no professional liability practice coverage for his practice from the prior owner. He just absorbed and bought, didn't go through the details and actually understand the coverages that they have. So the moment you're starting or making changes with your business, you need to make sure you're fully vetted and ready to roll before you even start. That's what I would consider on the individual side.
So wait a second, before you go on with that, because we do a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So we have a lot of owners who will buy another clinic. Their understanding is I'm buying that tax ID. It's not an asset sale. It's a stock sale. I'm buying that and I'm buying assets and liabilities, but my risk exposure begins at the day I settle from when I take over the practice. I am not liable for anything prior date. Is that still correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's different ways you could do that. I mean, you'd have to talk to a business attorney and also talk through with the tax liabilities. Sometimes you can absorb the liability going forward. What you should do if you're the entity being purchased, you should have a end date for coverage and an X date to be absorbed by the next one. So,
Gotcha.
so to speak, you can take the clinic and put it on the purchasing clinic's policy. It might, increase the cost of policy, or maybe you can maintain too. You hear a lot of different scenarios for it.
Yeah, I know when I sold my practice, I kept coverage for a year and a half after I sold because they were closing out all of the billing, right? And if any incident had come up after the fact, I wanted to not have coverage, right? That would fall back on me. So I kept my coverage for like 2 years, even after my settlement date, just to be extra careful. Daniel, do you have an opinion on that? Because we do see a lot of people who buy practices and they're really worried about the risk exposure they have when they acquire a practice.
Yeah, Brian, that's why you need due diligence, right? You need to know what exposure, to Will's point, who's drafting that contract. You need to know what the terms are. You need to read it. So if that rolling, year and a half out, that you still need to maintain that coverage under you as an entity, yes, you should maintain that. And just to the point of individuals having their own policy, no one said this, but it's incredibly affordable. It's very affordable to just have your own policy, just in the event that you are, we're always therapists. We don't get to turn that off. So even if we're giving advice in the elevator and someone says, I'm coming after you, you want that policy.
Yeah. And I think, Will, it's only like a couple $100 a year, right? It's not that much for an individual policy, right?
It's not much. And Daniel brings up a good point. If you're starting out as an individual, a student, individual working in a hospital, and you're thinking about starting a practice, I want you to know if you get sued for something you did a couple of years ago in the hospital, and then you open up your clinic, you could be personally liable as you're starting your new life stage and journey. You could be slapped with a subpoena and a lawsuit. So it's really, and I've seen that in other areas with nurse practitioners. They work for a hospital for years and years and years, and then they terminate, and then they move on, and then they get sued from something the year before they started their clinic. So being protected personally is really a good idea. Yes, it's only $140 if you're employed. Wow. If you're a 1099 and you're tooling around as a sole proprietor, probably looking at $340.
That's so worth it for all the hard work you put into building it. So
you spend $100,000 to get a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spend $100,000 for the degree, and you're not going to spend $300 a year for coverage. I mean,
it's a no-brainer.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would like to wrap up. First of all, thank you both so very, very much. That was very insightful and just a wealth of knowledge, both of you. So I really appreciate it. I do, before we leave and before we part, I want to just have you have any last words, final tips that you can share with our audience. So Daniel, we'll start with you. Is there any closing thoughts you have to share with us?
Nicole, I was thinking, the truth is we can't anticipate everything. You can't prevent everything from going wrong. And just like my example of the eliminating burns, we still have a responsibility to safely operate a business with reasonable procedures, right, in place to really mitigate those everyday reasonable risks. That's what we're looking at. And I think the easiest and most basic way to do that is you have to have a formal compliance program. You have to have one. And most of us wouldn't think twice about locking the door when we leave, right, at the end of the day, because that's a reasonable solution to preventing theft. So just you want those products that protect you. If you don't understand them, I always get excited when I hear policies and what's included in them. But if you don't understand them, you have to find them. Exactly. You have to get them. Because first of all, they're not expensive and they do protect all that other hard work on the back end.
Yeah. And I just want to echo what Daniel just said. I mean, that's a really good analogy, Daniel. We all would take proper steps to lock our doors to prevent theft and burglary. I mean, unless you live in Wisconsin with the other 5 people, nobody locks their doors. But for most of us, we lock our doors to be prudently safe and safeguard against, a downturn or a horrible event. Same thing here with the practice. Like I said, these owners are like, well, I'm going to get all the training from Meg and I'm going to, put in all these systems on operation. And I'm like, but I'll think about compliance down the road when I can get to it. The only reason why they say it is because they don't understand they don't really understand the risk exposure, the liability they're putting themselves at that point. So to that measure, this Zoomcast, Nicole, you're offering a free, like literally free checklist for you just to kind of check yourself out on our free checklist, like sign up, put your information in there. We're going to send it to you, do the free checklist, and then get a $600 audit. At least at that point, you're going to be higher on the mountain of education and knowledge and awareness. Make your decision from there. But beyond that, you all need coverage. We all need will. We all need protection.
Yeah, that was Daniel's closing thoughts. But yes, okay, moving on to Will.
No,
well, I just kicked it over to you.
I think you all summarized it well. Listen, take the time to know what you're doing and make sure you're covered before you start. I mean, that's really it. And whoever you have coverage with or the auditing capability with, you want to make sure it's vetted and it's good to go. And you want to make sure that company is going to be with you now and in the future. So,
and I've found from our clients, your company has better customer service, better pricing, and your company is more than willing to get on Zoom's cast like this, podcasts like ours, to really help. Like what we, Meg started as an education company. If we can't, if I can teach somebody something, it lasts a lifetime. If I do something for them at that moment, it's just good for that moment in time. So I really appreciate you, Will, and I really appreciate your willingness to come here and help educate our public, because it's just so much they don't know. If you could put that sheet together and we could put it up there and use it on our Zoomcast, use it on our resource page, believe me, it would go a long ways. For those of you listening, I am currently working on updating the post-pandemic playbook, like how to get the environment right and all that stuff. And you've heard me talk about ARIS, Active Pure. It's the only patented technology that actually does something in the breathable air that kills COVID in the air, literally goes out there. It's not just a filtration system, but it actually actively kills on surfaces and in the air. These are kinds of things we bring to our public. It's discounts. You don't pay full price because you're a listener to our public. So if you want to learn more about things like that and everything we talked about here, we're talking about everything with compliance and preventative things. That's why I wanted to bring that up real quick here at the end. Because if you don't protect your public, you don't protect your staff. Like Daniel said before, you're not going to be showing that you're acting in the best interest of everybody when you can. You absolutely can.
And we'll be adding your contact information on there. And I'm going to, virtually introduce Marty right now, who, if you do reach out, that is who you will be working with. And I'm telling you, these guys are, top notch. So very easy to work with. And we encourage you, if you have any questions about your coverage, your current coverage now, or looking to start up and, need to get coverage, talk to these guys and they'll steer you in the right direction.
Definitely. Is Marty from New York, Will? Is Marty from New York?
Yeah, Marty, New York.
I remember talking to him. He had that New York accent he was going on. I was like, "Oh boy, here we go. We're downtown."
Actually, in my hometown now. So, but it's but yeah, I've lived around the country, so my New York accent kind of goes away. So unfortunate.
It's very faint.
I can catch a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all, and all of our listeners, we appreciate you joining us too. And if you're hearing this at a later time, again, take advantage of all the resources that we put up there today, and reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything else that you need. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.